The clink of a fork against porcelain was a gunshot in the tomb-like quiet of the restaurant's exclusive upper floor. Zara didn't flinch. She stood with her spine straight, a ghost in her crisp white shirt and red vest, her presence trained to be felt only when required. Her tray, balanced on one palm, felt as light as a feather, an extension of her arm. This was her world now, a landscape of hushed conversations, the subtle scent of truffle oil, and the polite tyranny of the wealthy. She was a master of this terrain, navigating it with a placid expression that betrayed none of the desperate calculations running underneath. The rent was late. The light bill was a glaring red warning. Being a waitress at Tokyo's most acclaimed fine dining establishment, Ginza Sudo, paid better than most, but her past debts were a hungry ghost that ate every paycheck before it could settle. Tonight, the ghost was ravenous. She needed the generous tip that came from serving the private room, the one reserved for men whose names were spoken in whispers. And tonight, that room was occupied by one man. He had arrived without a reservation, yet the maitre d' had folded like a cheap suit, his face pale and slick with sweat. Zara had been assigned to him because she was the best, the most invisible, the least likely to make a mistake. She had entered the room and found him standing by the vast window, looking down at the glittering river of Ginza's main street. He hadn't turned, but she felt his awareness of her as a physical pressure in the room. His suit was the first thing she catalogued. A Tom Ford, charcoal gray, so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. It moved with an unnerving fluidity when he finally turned. But it was the glimpse of his hands that made the air in her lungs go still. They were resting on the back of a chair, long-fingered and elegant, but at the edge of his starched white cuff, a sliver of darkness peeked out. The intricate, deep blue and black lines of an Irizumi tattoo, a dragon's scale, disappeared up his sleeve. She knew what that meant. In this city, in this world, that ink was a crown. "You may pour the water," he said. His voice was low, a gravelly baritone with no discernible accent, just pure, cold authority. Zara moved, her actions economical and silent. She filled his glass from a crystal carafe, her movements practiced and smooth. She didn't look at his face, keeping her gaze respectfully lowered. It was part of the job, part of the invisibility. But she saw him in her periphery. Sharp jaw, black hair swept back from a high forehead, and eyes that were so dark they seemed to absorb the light in the room. He didn't watch her pour. He watched her. Another server, a younger man named Rio, made the fatal error of entering without being summoned, carrying a menu. "Sir, the specials for this evening," he began, his voice trembling slightly. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at Rio. He simply lifted one of those inked hands and made a minute, almost imperceptible gesture. Two other men, previously unnoticed shadows in the corners of the room, materialized. They flanked Rio, their presence suffocating. One placed a hand on the young server's shoulder, a grip that made Rio wince. He was not invited, the man said, his gaze still locked on Zara. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Zara's training, the kind that had nothing to do with serving wine, screamed at her. Assess the threat. Find the exit. Maintain calm. But her wallet screamed louder. She needed this tip. She needed to finish the service. She gave a short, almost imperceptible bow of her head. "My apologies, sir. It is my responsibility to ensure your privacy is respected. It will not happen again." The man's dark eyes narrowed slightly. He seemed to be looking past her face, past her uniform, searching for something deeper. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Rio was shaking now, held fast between the two silent enforcers. Finally, the man gave a curt nod. The enforcers released Rio, who all but scrambled out of the room. The man gestured to the chair opposite him.
"Seat."
Her blood ran cold. "Sir, I am here to serve you." "You are here to do as I say," he corrected, his tone unchanged.
"Seat."
Every instinct told her to refuse, to walk out and never look back. But the image of the eviction notice taped to her door flashed in her mind. She pulled out the chair and sat, her back ramrod straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was no longer a waitress. She was something else, something she didn't have a name for. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze analytical. "You are not afraid," he stated. "You are cautious. There is a difference. What is your name?" "Zara, sir." "Zara," he repeated, the sound of her name in his mouth feeling strange, proprietary. "I am Kaido. I have a job for you. My driver was retired. I require a new one. The position is yours." She stared at him, bewildered. "Sir, with all due respect, I am a waitress. I don't know the first thing about being a professional driver for someone like you. You know how to be silent. You know how to be still. You know how to follow an order without question, and you know how to take responsibility for a room. These are the only qualifications I require. The salary will be sufficient to ensure you no longer need to worry about things like rent." He said it with such certainty, as if he'd already read the file of her financial despair. It wasn't a job offer. It was a summons. He was a king in his dark kingdom, and he had pointed a finger at her. She thought of her tiny, bleak apartment. She thought of the gnawing anxiety that was her constant companion. And then she looked at Kaido, at the absolute, unshakable power radiating from him. This was a terrible, dangerous idea. It was a leap from a crumbling cliff into a dark, unknown ocean. She met his gaze for the first time, her own eyes steady. "When do I start?" The next morning, Zara stood in a cavernous underground garage that smelled of cold concrete, exhaust, and expensive leather. A sleek, black Lexus LS, armored and imposing, sat waiting. One of Kaido's men, a grim-faced man she'd seen in the restaurant, handed her a set of keys and a burner phone. "The boss is on his way. Do not be late. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not deviate from the route on the GPS, understand?" Zara simply nodded, taking the keys. The weight of them felt final. She had gone home, packed a small bag with the few things that mattered, and left her waitress uniform folded neatly on the bed of her now former apartment. She was trading one cage for another, but this one, at least, promised to be gilded. She ran a hand along the car's cold, polished exterior. It was a beautiful machine, a fortress on wheels. She opened the driver's door and slid inside, the scent of leather and cedar enveloping her. The seat was firm, the wheel perfectly weighted. It felt less like a luxury sedan and more like a cockpit. Minutes later, Kaido appeared, flanked by two guards. He was dressed in another impeccable suit, this time a deep navy blue that made him look even more severe. He didn't acknowledge her, simply getting into the back seat. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them inside. The silence was immediate and absolute. In the rearview mirror, she could see him, a still figure in the plush back seat, looking out the tinted window. "The destination is programmed," his voice came, calm and detached, through an intercom system she hadn't noticed. Zara took a breath, put the car in drive, and pulled out of the garage into the chaotic morning traffic of Tokyo. Her hands were steady on the wheel. Her heartbeat was a slow, rhythmic drum. This was just a mission. A new kind of mission. The objective: survival. She navigated the labyrinthine streets with practiced ease, her focus entirely on the road. She was aware of him, of course. It was impossible not to be. He was a black hole in her rearview mirror, pulling all light and energy toward him. She could feel the weight of his gaze even when he wasn't looking at her. Their first stop was a nondescript warehouse in the industrial district near the bay. The moment she pulled up, massive steel doors rolled open to reveal a dozen men who bowed in unison as Kaido stepped out of the car. Zara stayed behind the wheel, engine idling, her eyes scanning. She was just the driver, invisible, but the old habits died hard. She noted the exits, the sight lines, the way the men stood, some relaxed, some coiled like springs. She cataloged the makes and models of the other cars parked inside. It was automatic, an instinct she had spent years trying to suppress. He was gone for nearly an hour. She sat in the profound silence of the Lexus, the world outside muted by layers of armored glass. When he returned, his expression was exactly the same as when he had left, a mask of cold control. But she noticed a microscopic speck of blood on the cuff of his white shirt. It was so small most would miss it. She did not. She said nothing, simply putting the car in drive as the warehouse doors closed behind them. Their second drive was through the heart of the city. As she was navigating a tight intersection in Shinjuku, a black sedan with heavily tinted windows swerved aggressively from a side street, cutting them off. It wasn't just bad driving, it was a statement. A challenge. Most drivers would have slammed on the brakes, maybe honked. Zara's reaction was different. It was fluid, instantaneous. Her hands moved with a startling economy, her foot feathering the brake and accelerator in a perfect balance. She didn't just avoid the car. She glided around it in a maneuver that was both elegant and predatory, placing the armored bulk of the Lexus between Kaido and the potential threat without ever losing momentum. She never took her eyes off the road, but her senses were screaming. In the rearview mirror, she saw Kaido's head lift. He hadn't been looking at his phone or out the window. He had been watching her. His dark eyes met hers in the mirror, and for a split second, the mask slipped. It wasn't surprise on his face. It was a flicker of sharp, intense interest. The look a predator gives when it discovers its prey is not what it seemed. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The question was a tangible thing in the space between them. What are you? Zara kept her eyes on the road, her expression unreadable. She was just the driver. A broke waitress who got a lucky break. She had to be. Because if he ever found out what she really was, she wasn't sure if he would see her as an asset or a threat to be eliminated. The incident with the black sedan changed the atmosphere inside the car. The silence was no longer empty. It was charged, filled with unspoken questions. Zara could feel Kaido's scrutiny like a physical touch, a constant, low-level hum of awareness at the back of her neck. He was studying her, and she was acutely aware that she was failing to be the simple, unassuming woman he thought he'd hired. Her instincts were too sharp, her movements too precise. They were tells, tiny cracks in the facade she had so carefully constructed. A few days later, the test became more explicit. He directed her to a different route, a series of winding, narrow streets in an older part of the city. "Turn here," he commanded, his voice coming through the intercom. The GPS was telling her to go straight. "Sir, the programmed route," she began, her protocol kicking in. "I am aware of the route." "Turn here," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Zara obeyed, maneuvering the large sedan into a tight alleyway. It felt wrong. It felt like a trap. The alley opened into a small, enclosed market square, bustling with afternoon shoppers. And then she saw it. Another black sedan, identical to the one from before, parked and waiting at the far exit. Blocking it. Ahead, a delivery truck suddenly stalled, its driver getting out and looking at his engine with feigned confusion. They were boxed in. A cold, familiar calm washed over Zara. This was a kill box. A classic ambush setup. "It seems we have been delayed," Kaido said from the back, his voice unnervingly placid. He was testing her. He wanted to see what she would do. Panic was not an option. Resignation was a death sentence. Zara's mind went into a mode she hadn't accessed in years. Time seemed to slow down. She assessed the environment in seconds. The crowd was a liability, but also a shield. The market stalls were flimsy cover. The alley they'd come from was too narrow to turn around in quickly. But there was one other option. A pedestrian ramp leading down into a subterranean walkway. It was steep, narrow, and definitely not meant for a car. "Hold on," she said, her voice low and steady. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Before Kaido or his guards could react, she stomped on the accelerator. The Lexus surged forward, not toward the blocked exits, but directly at a row of flimsy fruit stalls. People screamed and scattered. The car plowed through wood and canvas, sending oranges and melons scattering across the cobblestones. She wasn't aiming for the stalls, but for the space behind them, the pedestrian ramp. The car hit the top of the ramp with a jarring crunch of metal on concrete. For a heart-stopping second, The vehicle tilted, balanced on two wheels. Zara wrenched the steering wheel, using the car's weight and momentum to slam it back down. They were on the ramp, descending into the tiled walkway at a terrifying angle. Pedestrians flattened themselves against the walls as the massive car scraped its way down, sparks flying where the chassis ground against the concrete. They emerged into the underground passage, a space meant for people and bicycles, not 2 tons of armored steel. She didn't slow down. She sped through the tunnel, her knuckles white on the wheel, her eyes locked on the exit ramp at the far end. They shot back up into daylight a quarter of a mile away, emerging onto a different street, leaving the ambush and the chaos far behind. She drove for another 5 minutes in complete silence before pulling over into a quiet side street. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, the adrenaline singing in her veins. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hands trembling slightly now that the immediate danger had passed. The door behind her opened. Kaito stepped out. He didn't look at the deep, ugly scrapes along the side of the car. He walked around to the driver's side. Zara didn't move as he opened her door. She expected anger, a cold dismissal, perhaps worse. He stood there, looking down at her. His face was unreadable, but his dark eyes were burning with an intensity that stripped her bare. The air between them was thick with the scent of burnt rubber and ozone. "Most people would have frozen," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They would have waited for my men to handle it. They would have died." Zara found her voice. "Freezing isn't in my nature, sir." "No," he agreed softly. "It isn't. You are many things, Zara. But you are not a waitress." He reached out, not to harm her, but to gently push a stray strand of hair from her face. The brief touch of his fingers against her temple was like an electric shock. It was the first time he had touched her. It was a moment of impossible intimacy in the wake of violence. "I believe it is time you told me who you really are." The confession felt like a betrayal of the quiet life she had tried so hard to build, a life that was now definitively over. They were in his penthouse, a starkly beautiful space of glass and steel overlooking the entire city. The lights of Tokyo glittered below like a fallen constellation. His 2 guards stood like statues by the door. "I was a Navy SEAL," Zara said, her voice even. She didn't offer details, didn't speak of the sand, the heat, the friends she'd lost. She just gave him the fact, hard and unadorned. Logistics and special reconnaissance. Honorable discharge. Kaito absorbed this information without a flicker of surprise, as if he were merely confirming a suspicion he'd held all along. He walked to the vast window, his back to her. "The American military trains its soldiers well, but they do not train them to run from a fight. They train them to run toward it." He turned back, his gaze pinning her in place. "Why were you working as a waitress, living in a place you could barely afford?" "I wanted a quiet life," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I was done with that world." "No one is ever done with the world that made them," he countered, his voice soft but absolute. "It lives in your bones. It lives in your hands." He gestured to her hands, which were now steady, resting at her sides. "Those are not the hands of a woman who serves tea. They are the hands of a woman who knows how to survive." That night, he didn't take her to a meeting or a sterile office. He took her somewhere else. She drove them to a quiet, secluded cemetery on a hill overlooking the city. It was meticulously kept, the stones clean, the gardens serene under the moonlight. He led her through the rows of graves to a simple, elegant stone marker under a cherry tree. There was a name carved into it, Akemi Tanaka. "She was my second in command," Kaito said, his voice losing its hard edge for the first time. It was quieter, laced with something that sounded like old grief. "She was brilliant, loyal. She saw the world with a clarity I have never found in another person." He fell silent, tracing the carved name with his fingertips. Zara waited, giving him the space his story required. 5 years ago, the Inagawakai, our rivals, grew bold. They believed we were weak. They set a trap, much like the one you drove us out of today. But my driver then was a fool. My security team was complacent. I had grown complacent. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. They targeted my car. Akemi was with me. She shielded me with her own body before my men could even react. The bullet that was meant for me, it took her instead. He finally looked at Zara, and in his eyes, she saw the wound he carried. It wasn't just grief. It was a profound, corrosive shame. I am the head of this family. It is my duty to protect my own. And I failed. My arrogance cost her everything. I have not allowed anyone to ride in that seat beside me since. Until today. Zara understood. She understood the ghosts of failure, the faces of those you couldn't save that visit you in the dead of night. Her own past was littered with them. She didn't offer him empty condolences. She offered him the only thing she could. The truth. In my old life, she said quietly, we had a saying, you can't save them all. You just have to save the next one foot. His eyes locked on hers. A current of understanding passed between them, deeper than any words. He had shown her his weakness, the one failure that defined him. And in her response, he had found not pity, but recognition. In that moment, she stopped being his employee. The danger was no longer a condition of her job. It was a shared space they both occupied. She could have walked away right then, demanded her pay, and disappeared back into the anonymous crowds of Tokyo. But she didn't. Looking at this powerful, broken man, she realized she didn't want to. She made a choice, a silent vow in the quiet of the cemetery. She would be the one to save the next one. The war with the Inagawa Kai escalated. Her display in the market square had not gone unnoticed. It was an embarrassment to them, a public humiliation. A Yakuza ambush, one of the most powerful clans in Tokyo, thwarted by a foreign woman in a luxury sedan. They wanted retribution, and their focus began to shift. It was no longer just about Kaido. It was about his new, mysterious weapon. The next attack was far more direct and far more brutal. They weren't in the car. Kaido had taken her to a meeting at a traditional tea house, a place of supposed neutrality. They were in a private room, the paper screens providing a fragile illusion of peace when the world exploded. The screens shredded as bullets ripped through them. The low table splintered. Zara reacted on pure instinct, tackling Kaido and throwing them both to the tatami mat floor as the room was torn apart. His guards in the hallway returned fire. The air filled with the roar of gunfire, the smell of cordite, and the splintering of wood. This wasn't a warning. This was an execution. To the kitchen, she yelled over the din, her voice a commander's bark. She didn't wait for his agreement. She grabbed the front of his suit and hauled him along, keeping them both low. They scrambled on hands and knees through the chaotic remains of the tea house. One of his guards fell, a dark stain spreading across his chest. They burst into the kitchen. Chefs and staff screamed, diving for cover. Zara's eyes swept the room, her SEAL training taking over completely. Stainless steel counters. A back exit leading to a loading dock. 2 Inagawa soldiers coming through a side door, guns raised. There was no time to think. She grabbed a heavy cleaver from a magnetic strip on the wall. Its weight was familiar, balanced. As the first soldier turned toward them, she moved. She didn't throw it. She closed the distance in 2 quick strides and brought the heavy blade down on his wrist with brutal, practiced efficiency. The man screamed, his gun clattering to the floor as his hand fell limp and useless. The second soldier raised his weapon, but Kaido was already moving, flowing with a lethal grace she hadn't seen before. He disarmed the man with a series of precise, devastating strikes to his elbow and throat. The soldier crumpled to the ground, gagging. It was over in seconds. The kitchen was a mess of terrified staff and downed hostiles. Zara stood there, chest heaving, the bloody cleaver still in her hand. She looked at the man she had maimed, at the blood on the floor, on her hands. The line she had tried to draw between her past and present had been obliterated. She had crossed it. She had killed or maimed in his name, for his protection. She was no longer a witness. She was a combatant in his war. She finally looked up and met Kaido's eyes. He wasn't looking at the chaos. He was looking at her. His face held no shock, no disgust. It held a raw, terrifying admiration. He saw what she was, what she had done, and he was not afraid. He was drawn to it. He stepped closer to her, into her space, until they were inches apart. The sounds of the ongoing fight outside faded into a dull roar. "Now you see," he whispered, his voice rough with adrenaline. "This is the world that made you. And it is the world that has been waiting for you." Back in the silent, sterile safety of his penthouse, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a hollow, ringing quiet in its place. Zara had washed the blood from her hands, but she could still feel the phantom weight of the cleaver, the sickening crunch of bone. She stood by the window, watching the city lights, feeling utterly disconnected from the peaceful world down below. She had taken a man's hand, perhaps his life. The waitress was well and truly dead. A soldier stood in her place. Kaido came to stand beside her. He had shed his suit jacket, and in the dim light, the intricate tattoos were visible, coiling up his arms under the thin fabric of his shirt. He didn't speak for a long time, the silence between them a living thing. "I have men, soldiers, who have sworn oaths of loyalty to me," he said finally, his voice a low murmur. "They are paid to die for me. None of them have ever moved with your certainty, with your finality." "It's what I was trained to do," she said, her voice flat. "Neutralize the threat. Protect the asset." "Was I the asset?" he asked, turning to face her. "Or were you simply protecting yourself?" She met his gaze. "Does it matter? We're both still alive." "It matters," he insisted, stepping closer. The space between them crackled with an energy that was more than just the aftermath of violence. It was something more dangerous. Because when you moved, you were not thinking of payment or duty. I saw it in your eyes. You were fighting for your life, yes. But you were fighting for mine as well. This was it. The moment of truth. He was no longer her employer, and she was no longer his driver. They were two predators who had survived an attack together, and the normal rules of the world no longer applied. "I told myself staying was about survival," Zara admitted, the words raw and honest. "The money. A roof over my head. I was lying to myself." His eyes darkened. "And the truth." "The truth is," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "this feels more real than any quiet life ever could." That was the confession. Not of love, but of something far more potent. Of recognition. Of belonging in a world of violence and high stakes that she had tried to flee. He reached out and cupped her jaw, his thumbs stroking her skin. His touch was no longer tentative. It was possessive. "The Inagawakai made a grave error today," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "They try to take something from me. And now, they have shown me exactly what it is I have to protect." His gaze was a physical force, holding her captive. "They will not make that mistake again. Because from this moment on, you do not leave my sight. You are not an asset, Zara. You are a part of my territory. And no one touches what is mine." His words should have felt like a cage, a threat to her independence. But as he stood there, his hand on her face, his promise of violent protection ringing in the air, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like coming home. The Inagawakai, shamed and furious, retaliated. But they were smarter now. They knew a direct assault on Kaido was suicide, especially with Zara by his side. So they changed tactics. They went after her past. A few days later, one of Kaido's men delivered a plain manila envelope to the penthouse. Inside was a single photograph. It was of the front door of her old apartment, the one she had left behind. Taped to the door was a picture of her, a candid shot taken weeks ago, her face tired as she returned from a long shift at the restaurant. A single, brutal red line was drawn across her throat in the photo. The message was unmistakable. "We know who you were. We know where to find the pieces of your old life. We can hurt you." Zara stared at the photograph, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. It was a violation, a ghost reaching from a past she thought she had successfully buried. Kaido took the photo from her hand. His face, usually a mask of icy control, became something else. It became a canvas of pure, cold fury. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. He didn't rage. He didn't yell. He became utterly, terrifyingly still. "They are reaching for you because they cannot reach me," he said, his voice dangerously soft. He slid the photo back into the envelope and handed it to one of his guards. "Find who took this. Find who gave the order. Bring them to me. All of them." The guard bowed and disappeared. Kaido turned back to Zara. The fury in his eyes was now banked, replaced by a possessive fire that was just as unnerving. He walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to her. "This is my fault," he said. "It wasn't an apology. It was a statement of fact. I brought you into this. Now, their war is with you as much as it is with me." He moved her things from the guest suite into his own master bedroom. It was a vast, minimalist space with a bed that looked out over the entire glittering expanse of Tokyo. "You will stay here. You will not leave this building without me. My guards will be with you at all times." Zara bristled. "I am not a porcelain doll, Kaido. I am not a kami. I will not be your protected tragedy." The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. She saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes before it was replaced by unyielding resolve. "No," he said, his voice low and intense as he stepped into her personal space. "You are not. Akemi was loyal. You are lethal. That is why the threat to you is greater. They don't see you as my weakness. They see you as my weapon. And they will do anything to disarm me." The tension between them was a taut wire. Her fierce independence against his absolute need for control. The forced proximity of sharing his private space was a constant friction. She saw him without his armor. The way he slept, the books he read, the quiet moments when the weight of his empire seemed to settle on his shoulders. He saw her, too. The discipline of her morning workouts, the focus in her eyes as she studied maps of the city, the restless energy of a warrior confined. One night, the pressure snapped. "I can't breathe in here," she said, pacing the length of the vast bedroom. "I feel like a prisoner." "You are being protected," he countered, his voice tight. He was standing by the window, a silhouette against the city lights. "I am being caged," she shot back, her voice rising. "You hired a driver, Kaido. You got a soldier. Don't treat me like a concubine you need to hide away." He turned from the window, and in 2 long strides, he was in front of her. He backed her against the wall, his hands planting on either side of her head, trapping her. His face was inches from hers, his dark eyes blazing. "Do you think this is about my honor?" he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Do you think I do this for the organization? This is not about territory. This is not about business." He lowered his head, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was hot on her skin. "When that bullet tore through the screen, my first thought was not of the Inagawa. It was of you. When I saw that photograph, I did not feel anger at a rival clan. I felt a rage so absolute I wanted to burn this city to the ground for daring to threaten you." His confession hung between them, more intimate than any declaration of love. It was raw, violent, and possessive. It was the truth of his dark heart. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic. It was a desperate, claiming act. It was the culmination of every unspoken word, every shared danger, every moment of simmering tension. It was a kiss that tasted of whiskey and power and the metallic tang of adrenaline. It was a brand. For a split second, she could have fought him. She could have pushed him away and re-established the line between them. But she didn't. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and kissed him back with all the fire and fury he had just unleashed in her. It was a collision, a surrender, and a declaration of war all at once. They had crossed the line. There was no going back. The kiss shattered the last barrier between them. They were no longer boss and bodyguard, master and servant. They were 2 equals, bound by a shared language of violence and a desperate, dangerous attraction. But the world outside the penthouse did not pause. The Inagawa Kai were still a threat, and Kaido was not a man who tolerated threats. The next morning, he was all business, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. He laid out architectural plans and satellite maps on a massive table in his study. The head of the Inagawa Kai is a man named Ruji, Kaido said, his voice cold and precise. He is old school, paranoid. He rarely leaves his fortified estate in Kamakura. He pointed to a sprawling compound on the map. But once a month, he visits a specific hot spring, a place his family has owned for generations. He believes it is impenetrable.
Zara studied the layout.
He takes the same route? On the same day? That's sloppy. It is arrogance, Kaido corrected. He believes no one would dare. He will be proven wrong. Tonight, he didn't sideline her or give her a passive role. He looked at her, his partner. His security detail is heavy. They sweep the route an hour before he travels. They have snipers on the surrounding hills. A direct assault is foolish. But you, he said, his eyes locking on hers. You think differently. You see the flaws in the fortress. Show me. For the next few hours, they worked. It was like a dance. Zara's mind, honed by years of special ops planning, saw the tactical weaknesses Kaido's men, used to brute force, had always missed. The drainage culvert that ran under the main road. The blind spot in the sniper coverage created by a rock outcropping. The shift change in the local police patrol that created a 12-minute window of reduced surveillance. She was in her element. He watched her, a look of profound respect on his face. He trusted her instincts completely. They formulated a plan that was surgical, precise, and lethal. It wasn't about a gang war.
It was a decapitation strike.
That night, she was not in a driver's uniform. She was dressed in practical, dark gear, a weapon holstered discreetly at her side. She moved alongside Kaido and his most elite men, not as an accessory, but as a field commander. She directed 2 of his men into the culvert. She pointed out the sniper blind spot to Kaido, who would lead the main assault team. Ruji's car is a reinforced Mercedes, she said, her voice low and calm in the tense darkness. They'll use it as a hard point to fall back to. We don't disable the car. We use it to trap him. The plan went into motion with silent, deadly precision. As Ruji's convoy entered the kill zone, the men from the culvert emerged, deploying caltrops that shredded the tires of the follow cars. The lead car, Ruji's Mercedes, screeched to a halt. Kaido's team emerged from the darkness, gunfire erupting, suppressing Ruji's guards. It was controlled chaos. Everything was going according to plan. Ruji was pinned down, his men being systematically eliminated. Zara was providing overwatch from a slight rise, her eyes scanning for the unexpected. And then she saw it, a flicker of movement where there should have been none. Not from the convoy, but from their own side. One of Kaido's men, a lieutenant named Endo who had been with him for a decade, was not firing at the enemy. He was slowly, deliberately raising his pistol, aiming it not at Ruji's guards, but at Kaido's exposed back. A traitor. There was no time to shout a warning. No time for anything but action. Zara drew her weapon. The distance was 40 yards. Kaido was moving. Endo was about to fire. The world narrowed to that single, horrifying tableau. She didn't hesitate. She fired once. The shot was perfect. Endo crumpled to the ground, a look of shock on his face, his own betrayal silenced before it could be completed. Kaido spun around, his eyes finding Zara instantly. He saw Endo on the ground. He saw the smoking barrel of her pistol. He understood in an instant what she had done. She had not just saved him from his enemies. She had saved him from his own family. She had paid the highest price of loyalty in his world, not with an oath, but with a bullet. The fight was over moments later. Ruji, his guards dead and his betrayal from within exposed, surrendered without another shot fired. He was a broken man. In the aftermath, the mountain air was cold and sharp, thick with the smell of gunpowder. Kaido's men were securing the scene, their movements grim and efficient. Kaido walked over to where Zara stood, her gun now safely holstered, her hands steady. He stopped in front of her, ignoring everyone else. He looked at the body of Endo, the man who had been his trusted lieutenant for 10 years, and then he looked at her. The cost of this victory was steep. Not in blood spilled from the enemy, but in the trust that had been shattered within his own organization. Nothing in this world was free. In my world, Kaido said, his voice quiet but carrying an absolute weight in the night air, we are defined by our debts and our loyalties. Tonight, you exposed a debt of betrayal I never knew I carried. And you showed me a loyalty I did not know I could possess. He reached out, taking her hand. His grip was firm, unwavering. You owe me nothing. You never have. But I am in your debt for life. This is no longer my empire. It is ours. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't need to. He stated a new reality, one she had forged with her own hands. Stay, he said, his dark eyes holding hers. Not as my driver. Not as my protection. As my equal. As the queen this kingdom requires. Zara looked at him, at this lethal, powerful man who had seen the soldier she tried to bury and called her magnificent. She looked at the dark, violent world around them, a world she had been forged in and had tried to escape. She had run from it only to find its center. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was finally home. She didn't answer with words. She simply tightened her grip on his hand, a silent acceptance, a mutual claim. Later, they stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the city sprawling beneath them, a universe of glittering lights and deep shadows. The silence between them was no longer a question or a challenge.
It was a territory,
a shared ground they had conquered together. She was no longer a broke waitress running from her past, and he was no longer just a king on his throne. They were a new kind of power, forged in fire and loyalty, ready to claim the night as their own.